Hi everyone, this is Professor James. So today we're going to be studying Chapter 1, which is simply an introduction to microbiology as a science. So let's begin. In this particular presentation, we're going to review the primary definition of microbiology and discuss some reasons why it's important to study this field. We'll also look at some of the first microorganisms to exist on Earth, as well as the earliest known infectious diseases. And then we'll look into a bit of history of microbiology by examining some of the individuals who made some very significant contributions to developing the field. And then lastly, we'll look at some careers for folks who, like myself, have decided to make microbiology a forte of their profession. So microbiology is kind of comprised of the acronyms or the two word components, micro and biology. Micro means small and biology means to study life. So in essence, we're talking about organisms that are incredibly small that are living entities. In some instances, we may not consider them living. Something like a virus is not actually living, though there's a lot of scientific debate going on behind that. But for the most part, the organisms that what we're going to be studying in this course are all going to be living microscopic organisms. Now, since biology is the study of living things, microbiology is more of a specialized type of biology. So it's a very special field where we focus primarily on anything that we primarily need to observe using a microscope. And so under this branch, it includes the study of microbes, very, very small living organisms, and then some, like I said, some non-living entities. And those are going to be things like virus, which again is very debatable in the literature, scientific literature. And some other things such as infectious proteins, which you may have heard at some point in your academic career. There's specific infectious proteins that are called prions, and they can enable diseases inside of humans and animals and other animals. So those are the kind of things that we're going to be looking at in this particular course. And then obviously we're going to look at the human microbial interaction between both entities. Now, living microbes are known as cellular microbes, and that means that they are comprised of a cell. And some microorganisms can be multicellular or they can be unicellular, which are the ones that we're going to be studying mostly in this course. Some groups of microbes include bacteria. The bacteria are what you're probably most familiar with. These are prokaryotic organisms that are pretty much found everywhere in nature. And then there's also another group called the archaea group, and these are some very extremely small microorganisms, and they reside in extreme locations. So if you've ever been to Yellowstone and you've gone and seen some of the pretty colored hot springs that are out there, all of those colors that you would see if you visited some of those hot springs actually are members of the archaea group. They can survive very high temperatures, they can survive very low temperatures, they can survive very high pressures, they can survive very low pressures. So the archaea groups is kind of a group of microorganisms that we really don't fully understand too much about. And scientists have they have quite a challenge trying to learn about this particular group, because we can't really develop the conditions that this group needs in order for us to study them inside the laboratory. So there's still a lot of research being done for that group so we can help understand what the archaea group actually is. But they're very much related to bacteria. They're unicellular and they don't contain a membrane-bound nucleus. Now some other groups of microbes include algae. They include protozoans, which are just kind of a hodgepodge of a whole lot of small unicellular organisms. Some are eukaryotic, which means they have a nucleus or a membrane-bound nucleus. And We also have some fungi, which are another type of microorganisms. Some fungi you can see with the naked eye, but still they're very incredibly small. And there are some fungi like yeast that you have to have a microscope in order to see, especially to observe their cell structure. So those are just some of the groups, and we have pathogenic bacteria, pathogenic protozoans, pathogenic fungi. Some algae could probably be pathogenic. And we're still not too certain about the archaea. But that's probably what we're interested in, is kind of the pathogenicity of these guys, which means how dangerous they can be when they come into contact with humans, or when human comes into contact with them. Non-living microbes are known as acellular microbes. These are going to be things like viruses and viroids, which are small components of viruses. And then again, those prions, which I mentioned earlier, which are infectious proteins. And you guys will do kind of a disease assignment where you're assigned a specific disease. And some of you may have viruses, some of you might have prions, and you can be able to research more about those. And we'll talk about more of those. We'll talk about those more in a little bit too. Now, microorganisms are pretty much found everywhere, and we're always pretty baffled by the things that we find. We're looking for bacteria and other microbes in outer space to help us fully understand kind of the scope of what it would take for life to live out in outer space. And microorganisms are considered to be the precursor in the chain of evolution. So studying their mechanisms and studying how they live and interact with other organisms helps us to understand ourselves, and helps us to understand how life has evolved to where we are in present day. This is just kind of a schematogram outlining acellular and cellular microbes. As I said, we've got the acellular folks, which are going to be our prions and viruses. A prion is a protein that can be inside of your body. And it's kind of a rebel protein, because what it does is it causes all of the normal proteins in your body to change shape. And if you don't know too much about proteins, which hopefully you discussed protein as a biomolecule in Anatomy 1 and Anatomy 2, but with a protein, it has to have a specific shape in order for it to function correctly. When you have a prion that can be the cause of a particular infectious disease, the prion will start to cause all of the normal proteins in the system where it thrives to kind of conform to its shape. And so in a sense, it'll cause proteins around it to change their morphology. And when those proteins start to change shape, they're no longer functional, which is why it can lead to disease. Now, mad cow disease and scabies are two diseases that have been linked to prions. But there's a lot of studies out there, because this is a pretty big hot topic in microbiology, kind of suggestive of the fact that prions can lead to a whole lot more diseases. Viruses, hopefully you know a little bit about viruses already. Viruses, there's so many of them out there, and we've taken extreme measures to kind of protect our population through the process of herd immunity, where we rely on vaccinations to make sure that members of the population receive either an attenuated virus in their system, or components of a virus, or we basically challenge our systems with a very limited in capacity viral agent. So that way it doesn't give us an infection, but allows our body to respond to that virus. So we'll talk more about vaccines later on in the course. But viruses, the way that they can attack cells in a couple of ways. First, they can inject themselves, or they can affix themselves to a cell, and then once they affix themselves to a cell, they will inject their DNA or RNA into the cell, and then they will cause that cell to start producing viral proteins. When the virus is being produced by the cell, eventually that virus can cause the cell to break down and destroy itself. So that's one way that a virus can induce harm in the body. And once it's replicated itself using a host cell, then all of those viral particles can go out and affect other cells inside the body, and that's how the virus will spread. So that's just one way on how a virus can attack a cell. Another way is through just simply integrating its DNA inside of a host cell and then hiding in that cell until it becomes active, and then it starts to break away from the cell. Before you know it, though, the cell has continually divided and generated more virally infected cells. So we'll talk more about viruses later on. As far as the cellular microorganisms go, we've already talked about these as it just went over in the last slide. We have the archaea group and the bacteria group as our prokaryotics. And remember, with the prokaryotic cells or prokaryotic organisms, these are organisms that do not contain a membrane-bound nucleus. They contain a region where there's a lot of nucleoid material, which means both organisms are going to have, or both groups will have DNA inside of them, but that DNA will not be surrounded by a membrane. The eukaryotic group is going to be the group that has a membrane-bound nucleus. And as I said before, that consists of our algae, fungi, and protozoan groups. Pathogens and germs, just to go over some definitions that you're going to hear continually throughout this course. Pathogens are anything that can induce a disease inside of a host system. So humans, animals, anything that will cause a disease and is a microbe, we consider it to be a pathogen. The microbes that cause diseases typically referred to as germs. Germs and pathogens can be used as interchangeably, but sometimes we have germs that are good and sometimes germs that are bad. If a germ is bad, we call it a pathogen. If it's good, we call it a non-pathogen. And most of the microorganisms that exist are considered to be non-pathogenic. So microbes can be found all over, pretty much. As I said, they're ubiquitous. They can live on and in our bodies, and then if they do that, we refer to this as our normal flora. Whereas in the slide it shows you it's called our indigenous microflora, which means it's a part of us. And those microbes can be helpful, and in some cases they can be bad for us. When your body is covered with lots of good bacteria, that bacteria serves as a protection, kind of a protective sheet, if you will, that will help other more harmful bacteria from colonizing your body. So think about your hands, or think about your arms, think about your legs. Now right now you've got a lot of different bacteria that's just colonizing those surfaces. But if you use something like hand sanitizer or hand sanitizer or some other type of antiseptic, and you remove all of that normal flora, then what will happen is something more pathogenic could potentially colonize those areas where you've gotten rid of your normal flora, and then eventually it could make its way down into your cardiovascular system, maybe through a crack in the skin or through an abrasion in the skin, and so that can cause you a lot more harm than good. So all of the bacteria that reside on your skin is good for you. They serve to protect you. They digest some of the waste that your cells generate. So bacteria in your body is a good thing, and again, that's called our indigenous microflora. However, when the bacteria that colonizes your skin or any other areas of your body ends up somehow getting from where it normally resides into an area of the body where it doesn't reside, that's when we refer to it as an opportunistic pathogen, if it induces some sort of disease or illness. So say you're about to undergo surgery and the doctor hasn't cleansed you properly, given you a proper medication or proper antibiotic to combat some of your normal flora. When the doctor cuts into